Simca was a French automaker, founded in November 1934 by Fiat and directed from July 1935 to May 1963 by Italian Enrico Copyright d'Or Pigozzi. Simca was affiliated with Fiat and then, after Simca bought Ford's French activities, became increasingly controlled by the Chrysler Group. In 1970, Simca became a subsidiary and brand of Chrysler Europe, ending its period as an independent company. Simca disappeared in 1978, when Chrysler divested its European operations to another French automaker, PSA Peugeot Citroën. PSA replaced the Simca brand with Talbot after a short period when some models were badged as Simca Talbots. During most of his post-war activity, Simca was one of the biggest automobile manufacturers in France. The Simca 1100 was for some time the best-selling car in France, while the Simca 1307 and Simca Horizon won the coveted European Car of the Year title in 1976 and 1978, respectively. These models were badge-engineered as products of other marques in some countries. For instance, the Simca 1307 was sold in Britain as the Chrysler Alpine, and the Horizon was also sold under the Chrysler brand. Simca vehicles were also manufactured by Simca do Brasil in São Paulo do Bernardo do Campo, Brazil, and Barreiros in Spain. They were also assembled in Chile, Colombia and the Netherlands during the Chrysler era. Foundation: Enrico Copyright d'Or Pigozzi was active in the automotive business in the early 1920s when he met Fiat founder, Giovanni Agnelli. They began business together in 1922 with Pigozzi acting as a scrap merchant, buying old automobile bodies and sending them to Fiat for recycling. 2 years later Pigozzi became Fiat's general agent in France, and in 1926 SAFAF was founded. In 1928, SAFAF started the assembly of Fiat cars in Suresnes near Paris, and licensed the production of some parts to local suppliers. By 1934, as many as 30,000 Fiat cars were sold by SAFAF. Simca Fiat, the SIMCA company, was founded in 1935 by Fiat, when Fiat bought the former Donnet factory in the French town of Nanterre. The first cars produced were Fiat 508 Balillas and Fiat 518 Arditas, but with Simca Fiat 6CV and 11CV badges. They were followed during 1936 by the Simca 5 or 5CV, a version of the Fiat Topolino announced in the spring, but only available for sale from October 1936. The Hute, an 8CV version of the Fiat 508C 1100, appeared in 1937. Production of the 6CV and 11CV stopped in 1937, leaving the 5CV and the 8CV in production until the outbreak of World War II. The firm nevertheless remained closely connected with Fiat, and it was not until 1938 that the shortened name Simca replaced Simca Fiat. Of the businesses that emerged as France's Big Four automakers after the war, Simca was unique in not suffering serious bomb damage to its plant. There were persistent suggestions that Henri Pigozzi's close personal relationship with the Agnelli family and Fiat's powerful political influence with the Mussolini government in Italy secured relatively favorable treatment for Simca during the years when France fell under the control of Italy's powerful ally, Germany. Despite France being occupied, Simca cars continued to be produced in small numbers throughout the war. Following the 1944 liberation, the Campagna Euro unregistered trademark's close association with Italy became an obvious liability in the feverish atmosphere of recrimination and new beginnings that swept France following 4 years of German occupation. Nevertheless, shortly after the liberation, the Nanterre plant's financial sustainability received a boost when Simca won a contract from the American Army to repair large numbers of Jeep engines. 1946, a decisive year. On January 3, 1946, the new governmental Euro unregistered trademark's 5-year plan for the automobile industry came into force. Government plans for Simca involved pushing it into a merger with various smaller companies such as Delahaye Delage, Bernard, Lafley and Unix so as to create an automobile manufacturing combine to be called a Euro OEGAR copyright NAR copyright rail for una sectionaires automobilia Euro. With half an eye on the Volkswagen project across the Rhine, the authorities determined that GFA should produce the two-door version of the A Euro OE AFG Euro, a small family car that had been developed during the war by the influential automobile engineer, Jean-Albert Gras. Copyright Goya. Gras. Copyright Goya owed his influence to a powerfully persuasive personality and a considerable engineering talent. Regarding the future of the French automobile industry, Gras. Copyright Goya held strong opinions, two of which favored front-wheel drive and aluminium as a material for car bodies. A few weeks after the liberation, Gras. Copyright Goya joined the Simca board as General Technical Director, in order to prepare for the production of the AFG at the Campania Euro unregistered trademark S Nanterre factory. For Simca, faced with a determinedly dirigist left-wing French government, the prospect of nationalization seemed very real. Simca Euro unregistered trademark S long-standing Director General, Henri Pigozzi, was obliged to deploy his very considerable reserves of guile and charm in order to retain his own position within the company, and it appears that in the end Pigozzi owed his very survival at Simca to the intervention with the national politicians of his new boardroom colleague, Jean-Albert Gras. Copyright Goya. In return, Gras. Copyright Goya obtained the personal commitment of the surviving Director General to the production at Nanterre of his two-door AFG. It is very easy to see how the two-door AFG looked, because its four-door equivalent went into production, little changed from Gras. Copyright Goya rear Euro unregistered trademark S prototype, as the Panadina Exit was a car designed by an engineer, and Pigozzi thought it ugly. In trying to make it more appealing to the style-conscious car buyers who, it was hoped, would appear in Simca showrooms once the economy picked up and government restrictions on car ownership began to be relaxed, Simca designers took the underpinnings of the Gras. Copyright Goya prototype and clothed it with various more conventionally modern bodies, the last of which looked uncannily similar to a shortened Peugeot 203. This Euro OE Simca Gras. Copyright Goya rear Euro performed satisfactorily in road tests in France and around Turin, and by September 1946 the car was deemed ready for production. But Pigozzi was still cautious. He had little enthusiasm for the gratuitously unfathomable complexities involved in producing a mass-market front-wheel drive car. The experience of the Citroën Traction Avant, which had bankrupted its manufacturer in the mid-1930s, was not encouraging. Pigozzi therefore applied to the government for a far higher level of government subsidy than the government could contemplate. Both the Euro OE Simca Gras. Copyright Goya rear Euro project and the governmental Euro unregistered trademark S own enthusiasm for micromanaging the French automobile industry were by now running out of momentum. Sensing that there was no prospect of putting the Euro OE Simca Gras. Copyright Goya rear Euro into production anytime soon, General Technical Director Gras. Copyright Goya resigned from the company early in 1947. Meanwhile, at the first Paris Motor Show since the end of the war, in October 1946, two models were on display on the Simca stand, being the Simca 5 and the Simca 8, at this stage barely distinguishable from their pre-war equivalents. A new car arrived in 1948 with the Simca 6, a development of the Simca 5 which it would eventually replace, and featuring an overhead valve 570cc engine. The Simca 6 was launched ahead of the introduction of the equivalent Fiat. The French economy in this period was in a precarious condition and government pressure was applied on the automakers to maximize export sales. During the first 8 months of 1947, Simca exported 70% of cars produced, placing it behind Citroën, Renault, Peugeot and Ford France. In the struggle to maximize exports, Simca was handicapped by the fact that it could not compete with its principal Italian shareholder, Fiat. Aronde and Ford SAF takeover. The Simca Aronde, launched in 1951, was the first Simca model not based on a Fiat design. It had a 1200cc engine and its production reached 100,000 units yearly. Following this success, Simca took over the French truck manufacturers Unic in 1951. Sanwa in 1956, and the Poissy plant of Ford SAF in 1954. The Poissy plant had ample room for expansion, enabling Simca to consolidate French production in a single plant and, in 1961, to sell the old Nanterre plant. The 1950s was a decade of growth for Simca, and by 1959 the combined output of the plants at Nanterre and at Poissy had exceeded 225,000 cars, placing the manufacturer in second place among French automakers in volume terms, ahead of Peugeot and Citroën, though still far behind market leader Renault. The Ford purchase also added the V8-powered Ford Vedette range to the Simca stable. This model continued to be produced and progressively upgraded until 1962 in France and 1967 in Brazil, but with various names under the Simca badge. An Aronde-powered version was also made in 1957 and called the Arion which, because it was economical and had a large body, was popular as a taxi. In 1958 Simca bought Talbot Lago, Brazil. The Simca plant received a visit by Juscelino Kubitschek before his inauguration in 1956, organized by a Brazilian general who had a family member employed there. He jokingly invited Simca to build a plant in Minas Gerais, his home state. Simca followed through and sent a letter of intent to this effect. In the interim, Brazil had formed an executive group for the automotive industry, which had established a set of requirements for any producer wishing to establish a plant in Brazil. Simca claimed that their proposal and arrangement with Kubitschek predated these rules and lobbied for exceptions. Simca also lobbied directly in Minas, but in the end were forced to present their own proposal, which was accepted with a number of conditions. The delays in passing the GEIA rules meant that Simca, which established its first plant in São Paulo, was unable to access hard currency and suffered severe parts shortages as a result. Simca quickly developed a reputation for low quality which it was unable to shake. Simca do Brasil was originally 50% Brazilian-owned, but after Chrysler took over Simca France in 1966 they also obtained control of the Brazilian arm. Simca remained based in São Paulo for the entire time they were active in Brazil and never moved to Minas, as originally promised. Their range was built around the 2.4-litre V8-engined Simca Vedette, which entered production in Brazil in March 1959. It was built under a variety of names and in a number of different body styles, until the Simca badge was retired there in 1969. Later models were redesigned completely, and were sold as the Simca Esplanada. Folga. The Simca Folga was a concept car designed in 1958 by Robert Opren for Simca and first displayed at the 1959 Geneva Auto Show. It was also displayed at the New York Auto Show, and the 1961 Chicago Auto Show. The concept car was intended to show what cars in the year 2000 would look like. It was to be atomic-powered, voice-controlled, guided by radar, and use only two wheels balanced by gyroscopes when driven at over 150 kph. Folga is Latin for flash or lightning. Another translation is lensman. Chrysler. In 1958, the American car manufacturer Chrysler Corporation, which wanted to enter the European car market, bought 15% of the Simca stocks from Ford in a deal which Henry Ford II was later reported as having publicly regretted. At this stage, however, the dominant shareholder remained Fiat, and their influence is apparent in the engineering and design of Simcas of that period such as the 1000 and 1300 models introduced respectively in 1961 and 1963. However, in 1963 Chrysler increased their stake to a controlling 64% by purchasing stock from Fiat, and they subsequently extended that holding further to 77%. Even in 1971 Fiat retained a 19% holding, but by now they had long ceased to play an active role in the business. Also, in 1964 Chrysler bought the British manufacturer Rootes, thus putting together the basis of Chrysler Europe. All the Simca models manufactured after 1967 had the Chrysler Pentastar logo as well as Simca badging. In 1961 Simca started to manufacture all of its models in the ex-Ford SAF factory in Poissy and sold the factory at Nanterre to Citroën. The rear-engine Simca 1000 was introduced in 1961 with its sporting offspring, the Simca Abarth in 1963. The 1000 also served as the platform for the 1000 Coupe, a sports coupe sporting a Baton-designed body by Giorgetto Giugiaro and four-wheel disc brakes. It debuted in 1963 and was described by Car Magazine as the world's neatest small coupe. 1967 saw the more powerful 1200 S-Bertone coupe that, with a horsepower upgrade in 1970, could reach the dizzying speed of almost 112 miles per hour, making it the fastest standard production Simca ever built. In 1967 a much more up-to-date car, the 1100, appeared with front-wheel drive and independent suspension all-round, and continued in production until 1979. On July 1, 1970 the company title was formally changed to Chrysler France. Collapse of Chrysler Europe. The most successful pre-Chrysler Simca models were the Around, the Simca 1000 and the front-engined 1100 Compact. During the late 1970s Chrysler era, Simca produced the new 160/180 Saloon, 1307 range and later the Horizon, both of which were named European Car of the Year at launch. However, Chrysler's forced marriage of Simca and Roots was not a happy one. Chrysler Europe collapsed in 1977 and the remains were sold to Peugeot the following year. The Roots models were quickly killed off, and the Simca-based Alpine/1307 and Horizon soldiered on through the first half of the 1980s using the resurrected Talbot badge. The last car to carry the Simca badge was the 1980 Solara, a 1307 with a boot, but by 1981 this had become a Talbot, thus ending the Simca marque entirely. After life, Peugeot eventually abandoned the Talbot brand, and the last Simca design was launched as Peugeot 309. The Peugeot 309 used Simca engines until October 1991 when they were replaced by PSA's own TU and XU series of engines. The 309 was produced at the former Roots factory in Ryton-on-Dunsmore, UK, as well as in the Poissy plant. Simcas were also manufactured in Brazil, Colombia, Spain and Finland. The last Simca-based car produced was the Horizon-based Dodge Omni, which was built in the USA until 1990. The European equivalent had already been axed 3 years earlier when use of the Talbot name on passenger cars was finally discontinued. Models: Simca 5, Simca 6, Simca 8, Simca 9, Simca 11, Simca Gordini Type 15, Simca Around, Simca Arion, Simca Vedette, Simca Jangada, Simca Esplanada, Simca Regent, Simca Tifa Poundo, Simca GTX, Simca 1000, Simca 1000 Cooper Copyright, Simca 1100, Simca 1300/1500, Simca 1301/1501, Simca 1200S, Chrysler Simca 16092 liter, Matra Simca Bayera, Matra Simca Rancho, Simca 13,071,309/1510, Simca Horizon, Talbot Simca Solara. References. Bibliography: Simca, L'Aventure de l'Hirondelle, by Adrian Kajusik, Editions ETAI, 2008. Simca, De Fiat to Talbot, by Michel G. Renner, Editions ETAI, 1999. Guide Simca, Chrysler Modèle de 1965 and 1980, by Michel G. Renner, Editions EPA, 1995. Guide Simca, Chrysler Modèle de 1934 and 1964, by Bruno Poirier, Editions EPA, 1994. Simca, Tout l'Histoire, by Michel G. Renner, Editions EPA, 1984, reissued 1994. Around, Le Grand Livre, by Michel G. Renner, Editions EPA, 1993. Simca, Un Appa copyrighted Doiso, by Jacques Rousseau, Editions Jacques Grancher, 1984. Reissued 1996, Editions Ra copyright Trovasseur. External links, irishtms.com, A Capsule History of the Simca Marque, Brazilian Simca's History, Simca 1000 Rally de la Copyright Gend, Simca Folga, Description and drawings.